Hello and welcome to another episode of Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones. And Into the Afroverse is where we're taking Black folks into the future. If you were listening last week, we were joined by two guests, actually, and we were talking about language. And like I said before, a lot of times when people think about Afrofuturism, uh, they don't think of it in this space. But as with it's something that we always do here, we talk about the various ways in which we should begin to look at the future of Black folks, not only in the United States, but around the world. And I think language is an area that is oftentimes overlooked in our communities. And with that, we have two guests today, our returning guests. We have April Broussard. April is currently a Spanish language teacher in New York City and a native of Texas with Louisiana roots and an alumna of Spelman College. And we're also joined by Rhashida Hilliard. Rhashida, born and raised in the multilingual apple, as she calls it. She currently teaches Spanish at a school in the Bronx. She's also taught Spanish and English to speakers of other languages in high schools and for nonprofit organizations. She is a true lover of language, and I'm going to use this quote again because I think it's great. She goes by this Mandela quote: "If you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in your own language, in his own language, that goes to his heart." When not speaking or attempting to speak to other people in their own language, she enjoys spending time with family and friends. And with that, we're welcoming back April and Rhashida. How you ladies doing?
Doing well, thank you. How are you?
Doing well, thanks.
I'm
Um,
sorry.
no, that's fine. We were talking the last time, we are just kind of laying the foundation, getting a better understanding of your background, what drives you to do what you do. And we're talking about the importance of language and language learning and strategies and techniques that even families could look at to begin to incorporate language into their households. But what I want to speak about specifically today is the work that you've been doing, not only in your classrooms, but in your workshops, because you mentioned before you traveled to other states and cities and so forth. What specifically are you doing in these workshops? And let's start off with, how can folks find you? April.
Well, how can folks find me? Well,
Yes.
I have a few social media accounts. It's at April Brew, APRILBROU. You could feel free to reach out there. And some of the workshops that we've done, some participants have commented and left comments on my page around that. The workshops that we do so far have been for teachers and for educators who teach languages or who are responsible for those who teach languages. Just this idea of how we can be more intentional in the work that we do, invite more students in to engage with the work and learn the work. Practical tips, things that teachers can say like, oh, wait, I have a population of students that have this background and I want them to be more engaged with the Spanish language. And we give them ideas about what we can do to help them show the students that they are a part of it, that they belong. So it's real practical tips. The workshops are usually through language organizations, but we are available to work independently, one-on-one. So that's always an option as well. But we usually set the title for the workshop, but we allow the participants to let us know what some of their dilemmas are, and we can workshop them in real time.
And what is it you found has been some of the greatest challenges in terms of getting young people to learn languages? When you talk about educators saying that, they're trying to troubleshoot and improve upon the quality of their lessons, what is it that you found in your workshops where educators seem to struggle the most, if you will? Sheeta?
So hi, this is Rhashida. I don't have too many social media web pages, first off, but I have email. Um, my main email is rxapl HILLIARD@gmail.com. I still use Facebook. But in terms of what are some of the challenges? I'm just going to think about our most recent workshop, whereby we decided to focus on the world language readiness standards. So world languages has particular standards if you follow the national standards, goals and standards, around community communications, comparisons, and what have you. And one of the things that came up when we were talking about using the standards to address bias was that sometimes the students also come in with preconceived, obviously, we all have biases, but the students come in with preconceived notions about like who speaks this language or what people look like, or even whatever it is. And I think that was sort of a challenge because although we focus on the teachers and some of the biases that we might have when we're teaching, we also have to be aware that the students might come in with some biases, and we need to be ready to address those biases. If you are in the world and you kind of follow what's going on, you don't have to necessarily have like particular accounts, but I think you should be aware about what's going on in your community to know what the students might bring to the classroom so that you're ready to hopefully address that. And I think while there were no specifics that were mentioned in terms of what the students come in with, or not true specific, there were some things that you can imagine. And some of the things that might come up, for example, is that, these groups of people maybe are, let's say, undocumented or this, like just different stereotypes that possibly come up that we're not necessarily thinking that the students might bring. And then we're kind of thrown off guard when, let's say, you ask, so can you tell me what you know about X, Y, and Z? And then they start saying some of the, in quotes, negative things. And you're like, oh, wow, like, I don't know how to address this. I think we should be aware of that so that we have some sort of counter narrative. Because if there's a bad, there's always good. If there's left, there's a right. And I think sometimes when we're not prepared as educators, we get thrown off guard. And then we either say like, those students can't learn, or those students are bad, or whatever the case is, when in reality, this is just a part of life. And we just need to be a little more prepared so that we can address some of these issues around language learning and who the people are who speak the languages that we are teaching.
I see. So I get what you're saying about in terms of what baggage students may bring to the classroom, but what about yourselves as Black women speaking another language? Have there been any problems or issues with your peers in terms of them recognizing your expertise and appreciating what you're bringing to the table? Or has it been, relatively easy for you to fit in certain spaces? And you can speak to those challenges. We start with you, April.
No, it has not been easy. So I think sadly, because I am a Black woman, the default is that I'm not the expert or an expert, or that I don't know. But what I do know is because I've learned the language, right? I have studied in various places, been around different people, and just my personal beliefs around language, I show that there are many correct answers, right? So I'm one of those correct answers when it comes to teaching the language, but I do have to prove that sometimes. The way my current situation is set up, students leave my school after 8th grade and they go off into high school. So the proof is in the results of when they take their placement test to see where they should go and how well they're doing, or when they visit schools. In New York City, there's a high school placement process, so students have to apply for high schools. And then when they apply and they visit the schools, and they'll come back and say, oh, I sat in this class, I knew everything that the teacher was saying, I was able to answer some questions. So I think my reputation has come with being in a space for a period of time. But initially, it's always the question mark of, who are you? Where are you from? How do you know this? What type of Spanish are you going to teach the kids? It's always some suspicion there. And I think it's just after they see the work that I do, then they become more invested. But initially, it's never easy to start in a new environment.
And Rhashida, what about yourself?
I can say that in a few instances, I've been one of few language educators. So, and in one case, I was the only language educator, so I was the sole expert. So I don't know what people necessarily thought in my department because I was the person.
Right.
Maybe once I heard that someone said, well, she doesn't, because it wasn't my native language. And I think this was early on in my career. Oh, because she doesn't, she's not a native speaker. Why would you go to her? I think a student actually brought that up, that a colleague of mine made this comment. It was one of those sort of comments. Other than that, I think if you want to consider this a challenge, I think when this has nothing to do with the language learning or teaching aspect, but as a person who really enjoys what she does, I'll go the extra mile. So I like, for example, since I learned in Spain and Puerto Rico, those are my two study abroad experiences. I come from the perspective of if there are 21 Spanish speaking countries, you might have 21 different ways of saying things. Right. And so just like April was saying, I try to give those examples to the students, not to overwhelm them, but just to show, like, they'll say, how do you say sandwich? And I say, well, you can say bocadillo, you can say sandwich, you can say torta. It depends on where you are. And I think one of the challenges is that because I'll go that extra mile, so to speak, sometimes I could become the default person in terms of doing the work. So in a sense, I guess I'm trusted to do X, Y, and Z, but then I become the default person as well.
I see.
That makes, even if I have other people in the department who, do speak the language, I think the challenge has nothing to do with the language per se, but with the work ethic.
Gotcha. And we're talking language today on Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones. And Into the Afroverse, we're taking Black folks into the future. And once again, we're joined by April Broussard and Rhashida Hilliard. And we're talking about language learning, the importance of it, the significance of it. Let me ask you this. In your research, in your workshops, what has been perhaps the most surprising thing that you have found when you talk about, was it intentional representation? What is it that you found? What was the most surprising thing that came up in your studies? April?
So the most surprising thing I would say for me is that sometimes some teachers don't know the importance of getting to know their students and leveraging that in their instruction, right? So people come in with a plan and they've done a lot of work, spent a lot of time on it, and they expect to execute it and, it's going to go well. But I think sometimes there's been a lack of this could have had a greater impact if I was able to connect it to the students in the space. So this idea of gathering information from your students and using that information, sometimes I think it's a mindset. Mm-hmm. Some teachers come in like, I am the teacher, I bear the knowledge, I'm going to now give it to you. So the mindset shift around, there's a lot to learn from the students. So you might have the language that you're trying to give to them, but they have other things that they can in turn give to you. That's going to make it a richer experience. So I think the biggest surprise for me was that some teachers are still not using their students as a source of knowledge and then crafting their lessons around that.
And what about yourself, Rhashida?
One of the biggest surprises, and this was a pleasant surprise, was that so when we first started our workshops, the first one was intentional representation. Maybe we had about 15 people. This was at a national conference. And I guess we made an impact because the following year we had the conference in Washington, D.C., and it was like standing room only. And then next thing you know, we would have these people emailing like, you don't know how much this actually made a difference in my classroom. I had a particular lesson that we focused on hairstyles, whatever it was. I saved some of the commentary because it was really inspiring. It made us realize that, so this is needed.
Right.
People are looking for ways to reach their students, and then from there, it just sparked an interest in us to actually want to do more. So while some of those workshops were like 45 minutes, we started doing 3-hour workshops and things like that. And it's just like, you don't realize that the importance of your work until you actually hear from other people who are like, no, this is really needed. And just imagine, while we're speaking to educators, some of the educators have maybe 30 people in a classroom times 5 classrooms. So yeah, it's just amazing how far we can reach, like how many people we can reach and how far we can reach, because some of the people, like, since their national conferences are on other coasts, or actually some of them are also teacher educators. So they'll even reach out to say, would you consider doing the course for future teachers? And it's a lot because we are also still teaching, but it makes us realize that this is really needed. You don't hear about it so much, but this is really needed.
Excellent. So, on Into the Afroverse, we're all about Afrofuturism. We're all about looking forward. What would you like to see when it comes to language education in this country, specifically in Black communities? What would you like to see we talked a little bit about this in the last segment, but what would you like to see in terms of increasing awareness, increasing participation of Black students? Because as you had mentioned, there are a lot of Black students, a lot of Black young people that will turn themselves off to language and the idea of learning it because they don't see themselves being reflected in Spanish-speaking culture, be it movies, television, and the like. So moving forward, what would you like to see? And what role would you like to play in helping to make that happen? What do you think, April?
I would like to see it as a part of everyday life. I'm thinking grassroots level community engagement, right? So what do students do after school? What do students do on the weekend? And how can language be a part of that? I think that would require those of us who know it to volunteer. I'm thinking high school students. There are some high school students who are succeeding in the language. They could volunteer. College level students, elders, right? After people retire, they still want to participate in some way. So just making it a part of the community, right? So that it's not like I am going to this place to learn, but no, it's a part of what we do, right? So whatever the activity is, maybe somebody is explaining it in Spanish, or maybe you can decide, do you want to take this basketball clinic with somebody who speaks Spanish? You know how to play basketball. You know what the drills are, but they're going to be speaking in Spanish. So you can pick up the language that way. So just how can we take what we're already doing and infuse the language into it that way?
And Rhashida, your vision, what do you see?
Actually, that was really that was really good in terms of, things happening at the grassroots level. I think in the same way that English to speakers of other languages is promoted in certain not-for-profit organizations, other languages should be promoted to communities, specifically Black communities. I don't know how, I'm not saying like information is not there, but there's also a way that you can be welcoming to people. And I'm not implying that people don't feel welcome, because I haven't been in those spaces where people are like, I tried to take a Spanish class and they said, no, you can't take it because you're Black. I'm not saying that.
Right.
I'm just wondering if it's advertised in a way where it would be welcoming to people who would feel like, oh, I can take this, or if the information is out there. And I'm saying this as someone who does teach Spanish to people who are learning Spanish. In my experience, when I teach the courses, sometimes I have to do the advertisement, even though I'm not the person who is like the advertiser.
Mm-hmm.
So what I do is I actually get the email addresses of the students on my own, And then I end up emailing them myself if I find out that the course is going to be offered. When I do reach out, sometimes it's like, oh, we never heard from X, Y, and Z. So while it's not necessarily in quotes my job to do the outreach, sometimes it might have to be like that. And I guess that is grassroots. So if we can have like an organized way, maybe even if we have to create spaces where people feel like they're welcome to learn the language. And we've been talking about Spanish, but of course, there are other languages as well. If we can create those spaces and be welcoming, because I think that's a part of it too. Like I would probably be turned off if I go to a place and it's like, this is open to everyone, but then I try to sign up and people are not really receiving me. I might be to learning the language. So having a space, maybe looking for those spaces, doing some community outreach and hopefully, that will be a start. And maybe even making things, I'm going to say this, maybe making things fun initially. Like, oh, we're going to, like you said, if people play basketball, oh, we can play basketball with someone who speaks Spanish, or maybe it could be something related to cooking. I think that's the way that people bond. Like, as long as, you follow some codes, everyone, I'm just saying, come off the street after playing basketball and start cooking, but maybe find ways, like some ways in that'll get people interested in learning. And then eventually it becomes more like natural.
Excellent. Now, one of the things that I find interesting, and before I move forward, you talked about grassroots and community. I'm sure folks are listening. They would love to have you speak perhaps to their organization, or there's a school out there listening outside of New York that would love to have you come in and speak to their teachers. How can people find you? April, what is your contact information?
Great. So the best way you could contact me on social media, it's at AprilBrew, APRILBROU. That's also my email address, aprilbrew@gmail.com. You could reach out.
And Rhashida?
You can reach out to me via email at RX, as in xylophone, HILLIARD@gmail.com.
Excellent. It's really interesting with language in this country. If a person is multilingual and they've learned all these different languages while they're in school, that's held up as a status symbol. But if a person is a native speaker, there seems to be this rejection or challenge. What do you think is the threat when it comes to Spanish speakers or any language in this country? Because it often has a lot of pushback when people see signs in other languages. You oftentimes, when someone is speaking another language, some foolish person will shout, "Go back to your own country." Why do you think that is such a threat to some people on some level?
Fear of the Black planet. I mean, it's just a fear. It's fear-based, right? Mm-hmm. That's the thing that comes to me right away. And it's from ignorance as well, right? It's this idea of someone's going to replace or take your spot or take your resources, instead of realizing, like, if we come together and combine the resources, things will be better for us all. So I do understand what you're saying, and I see that. So now I'm making the connection with, there are young Black people growing up around people who speak other languages, but they might not do it in public. They might not do it around them for that fear, right? They don't want to be mistreated. They don't want to hear those slurs and those things. So it's just based in fear.
Mm-hmm. I got you. And Rhashida, what are your thoughts on that?
So fear comes from not from the unknown. Like, you fear things that you don't know. Mm-hmm. So I'm also thinking too, you said in terms of the person who doesn't speak the language might make these comments.
Yes.
I think a part of it, if we are honest, is that sometimes it's not just like one answer. So yes, the fear of the unknown. And sometimes what happens is that people do use the language as a weapon. There have been instances where people who maybe speak another language will say things about a person that they know doesn't understand the language. And therefore the person's reaction is kind of like, well, go back to your country, whatever it is.
Right.
I don't know. So I think there's a lot that sometimes it's just from a lack of having the relationships between the communities. So there's a lot that goes into it. I mean, that's like my simple answer.
Right.
Unfortunate, that's just the way it is. But if you can find a trusted member of a community who's willing to, impart the knowledge, and there's like an exchange on both ends, then you'll start seeing that fear dissipate.
Gotcha. And once again, I can't believe it. This has been such an engaging conversation. I know folks listening have gotten a lot from it. We are closing in at the end of another segment here on Into the Afroverse. Any final thoughts that you would like to leave us with when it comes to your experiences, anything you'd like to share with us around this theme of language, or any thoughts as relates to what we've been talking about? We'll start with you, April.
Yes, I would just encourage everybody to give it a try. And when I say it, I mean language and language learning. Some language might work for you and your ears and your voice. Others might not. Like, don't stop, don't give up. I also want to promote sign language, American Sign Language, right? Because they're neurodivergent learners. And so speaking might not be the way to go. I'm encouraging Black people, Black children, Black families, learn American Sign Language.
Excellent. And Rhashida.
And I'm gonna plug italki just because I feel like I don't have any stake in this, but I have been using it to learn Zulu. Mm-hmm. And you can communicate with people from around the world. So it could be any language if it's on that app, of course. Mm-hmm. But at least you're speaking to someone in real time. I think sometimes people are afraid to speak or learn because they feel like, okay, I can't pronounce this properly. That actually happens too, even when we're teaching a language. Sometimes the students don't want to go out in the world and speak because there's a fear that they might sound bad or the person won't understand them. Right. And I think, like, if you can do these things now that we do have these sort of like Zoom channel, Zoom and Google Meet and what have you, at least you can talk to someone in real time and they can help you out with the pronunciation. And then from there, you could practice with them. And eventually when you get out into the world, just give it a try. Maybe start with one person before you go make speeches,
Got you. Well, once again, ladies, thank you so much for taking time out to join us here at Into the Afroverse. Now, I'm going to try something because it's been a long time since I've spoken Spanish. Can you help me with a phrase? I would like to say Into the Afroverse, where we're taking Black people into the future. Can you help me say that phrase, please? Either one of you or both of you, because I might need both of you to help me out on this one.
Let's see. Okay, so Afroverse would be like universe, right?
Okay.
I would use the word mundo, and that's another thing about language. Sometimes you can't do direct translations.
Right.
So dentro del mundo.
Dentro del mundo.
De los africanos.
De los africanos.
Wait, what was the other part? Where we can
take Black folks into the future.
Donde I was going to say los negros.
That's cool.
Negra. Mm-hmm. I'll say pueda. Because now I'm trying to break down the language. Right. Pueda is more like it can happen, it's possible, Right. Pueda ir al mundo, al futuro de los africanos. Okay, maybe let me see. Dentro del mundo de los africanos. Dentro del mundo de los africanos, donde la gente negra pueda ir al futuro de los africanos.
Wow, I'm gonna leave that there. I'm not even gonna attempt. I'm not even gonna attempt to say that.
Would that be a good way to say that? Dentro del mundo de los africanos, donde la gente negra pueda ir al futuro de los africanos.
Wow. And April, anything to add to that?
I agree with all of that. I agree with all of that.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, ladies, for joining
Thank
us here at
you.
Into the Afroverse. Truly appreciate it. And as you continue with your work, if there is anything, that you're adding to it, you want to share with the audience, you are always welcome back. And one more time before we sign off, can we get your contact information? Rhashida?
Rhashida is RXHILLIARD
And April?
It's at April Brew, APRILBROU, or aprilbrew@gmail.com.
All right. Thanks again, ladies. So that'll do it for another episode of Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones. And Into the Afroverse is where we're taking Black folks into the future. Thank you for listening. And remember, you can find us on YouTube at the Afrofuturism Network. And you can also go to afrofuturismnet.com. So many people are asking how can they support the show? How can they support Into the Afroverse? Go to the website, get the information there. And of course, we're on social media under Afrofuturism Network. And special shout out to Mr. Duke Productions for producing today's show. Thank you for listening. Take care and have a good day.